Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Discovery Debrief, a podcast that dives deeply into the weeds of the latest trek into the final frontier, Star Trek Discovery. I'm co-host Chris Clow, and I'm joined as usual by members of our wonderful panel, including Rachael Clow.
Hey, Chris.
Hello. Zaki Hasan.
Howdy.
And Cicero Holmes.
Speak the name of Kalis.
Excellent. So the show is continuing its foray into the dreaded mirror universe, with the crew of Discovery undercover in dangerous space as they desperately try to find a way home. This week's episode of Star Trek Discovery was not without a fair amount of surprise and a whole hell of a lot of consequence, so we have quite a lot to talk about today. But first, as usual, how's everyone's week been? Did you guys take in any more Star Trek, or have you given any more thought to the way the show is shaping up, or you have any other general franchise thoughts as we open up the show this week? Cicero, why don't we start with you?
You know what? I actually did take in a lot of Star Trek. I spent a lot of time watching Mirror Universe episodes. So I watched Mirror Mirror almost immediately after the season, or the winter premiere, or the spring premiere, or whatever, of Discovery, and then went and watched the Mirror Darkly two-parter on Enterprise, which I hadn't watched in probably 2 or 3 years, and I really loved how they presented that entire episode with the new intro, totally new music. Just it was really super, super cool. So yeah, I watched those. I didn't watch the ones on DS9, but those are next on my list.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a fair amount of them too in Deep Space Nine, and they don't stick close to the template that I think was established in the TOS episode, or really in what was carried over in Enterprise. So it seems like they're kind of other, like last week, Zaki was talking about how, there's Mirror, and then there's everything else.
Right.
And that's kind of how I feel about the DS9 Mirror episodes. They're certainly not bad, but they feel very different and very disconnected from what we had seen before. But, the thing that continuously surprises me about Mirror itself is just how eminently watchable that is, even now. I mean, that's still, to me, for my money anyway, one of the most entertaining episodes of the original series ever, in all of its seasons. So glad you had a chance to take that in. That's really cool. And I'm sure, did you, having absorbed a lot of Mirror Universe stuff, then did you get any new thoughts created about the way that Discovery is handling it?
I was I'm just along for the ride for the Discovery thing, and I think it's one of those things where when you have these like recurring tropes from a franchise, you can't. It's more difficult to view it in the moment, as opposed to, allowing yourself to take some time and process the entire thing, especially since I had the feeling that we were going to be here for at least a little while. That I wanted to take some time and take it as a whole and say, what was the Discovery's jaunt in the Mirror Universe like, as opposed to the Enterprise's, just kind of two-parter throwaway Mirror Universe for kicks versus Mirror, and then be able to sit back and assess it and properly gauge its worth.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very well said. Well, Rachael, what have you been up to over the last week? I mean, obviously, most people who know, I kind of know, but of course, let's talk about it. What have you been up to in Star Trek for the last week?
I've been watching Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, continuing the DS9 rewatch.
Well, actually, in honor of Kim Kardashian's surrogate having given birth to her third child, I watched the episode where Kira has the O'Brien's child for them. So that just happened to line up on the same day.
Right.
But I was like, oh, how good.
Retroactive tribute.
Yes.
I like the way that they did that, though. I mean, dealing with the fact that Nana Visitor was pregnant, they definitely dealt with it in a very novel way by tying it to another character first before sort of looping it back to. And then there was that in-joke between she and Dr. Bashir, like, well, this is your fault. And yeah, it was, because meta joke, it was his baby. But just some of the cool aspects of,
which actually, if you watch some earlier episodes, it was so obvious that they were like having a thing.
There was chemistry.
Yeah, like anytime that they were on screen together, you were like, oh, they're into each other.
There's magic in the air. Right, as Timon once said. Yeah.
No.
yeah, and you had to point that out to me because that stuff always goes way over my head. I was like, oh, okay, all right, yeah, I can maybe see that. That's interesting, but still, cool episode overall, right?
Yeah, cool. I like that they sort of wrote her pregnancy into the show instead of like having her stand behind like boxes and stuff.
Yeah,
just we all have to pretend like we don't see it.
Yeah, you always point out, like when you watch X-Files episodes where Gillian Anderson was pregnant, how they tried to sort of frame it to make it look like she wasn't.
It was only her first pregnancy that they.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, so they had Gillian Anderson get abducted by aliens. So, and then the aliens like injected air into her belly in one shot, and it was actually her pregnant belly. Yeah.
That's awesome.
All right.
That is awesome.
Points for creativity to Mr. Chris Carter. Zaki, my friend, how about you?
Well, the reviewing is continuing just by chance. The timing lines up where I'm on crossover with Deep Space Nine, which is their first of the Mirror episodes. And picking up on what Rachel is saying, it's the teaser is Kira showing how much she dislikes Bashir, which is very funny given the personal context between them.
Yeah.
And this, I haven't seen this episode since probably 2003. It's been at least that long, so it was fairly fresh to me, and it was fun because I was watching it with my oldest, and when Mirror Kira shows up, he's like, "Hey, this is like that episode where Spock has the beard," and I'm like, "Oh, is it really?" Keep watching, and and then they drop the Captain Kirk reference, and he's like, "It is just like that," Nice. He got real excited, and then I got excited because he got excited and we did the Dance of Joy, and. And it was fun. It was fun also because of, obviously, with the added context that we have with the current Discovery arc. It's nice to kind of see if there's any attempt made at tonal consistency, if not continuity. And so that's kind of interesting. I'm definitely looking forward to getting to the other Mirror episodes, which, as I mentioned last week, I'm not a huge fan of I'm not a huge fan in general of the jaunts to the Mirror universe on Deep Space Nine, because Chris, kind of what you're saying, because it stopped being what the Mirror universe was originally,
right?
Which was the evil incarnations of our characters. The Deep Space Nine Mirror episodes really weren't that.
No.
And then on Enterprise, as much as I liked the craft and skill that went into creating them, what I disliked about those two episodes was, I remember distinctly at the time, I was like, we're almost done, and these are two episodes that we're not spending with our characters because we're doing this, and I remember being irked by that somewhat.
Sure, and that's very understandable, and that's also something that I felt about the finale of Enterprise as well.
Yeah.
I mean, as cool as it was to see Commander Riker and Counselor Troy again, and to hear Data again, it was still time that we were not going to be getting with these characters that we had spent 4 years with up until that point. But when it comes to taking in crossover again, how did you feel, especially with the context of everything? Because it sounds like you haven't seen this episode since before Enterprise did its Mirror Universe episodes, and certainly not before Discovery had done its foray into the Mirror Universe. So did you see it with new eyes at all, or was it pretty much as you remembered it?
It's similar to how I remembered it. I thought crossover is the strongest of their Mirror episodes, and I think the novelty of it is, oh, here's what happened after Captain Kirk beamed away. And that was always kind of, the ending of Mirror Mirror was always kind of pregnant with that question of like, what happened next? And so we get like 100 years of, turns out everything went to shit. So that was like in hindsight, Kirk just made things worse for humans,
Yeah, definitely. Well, and to that episode's credit, it always made way more sense when Regent Kira, or not Regent Kira, Intendant Kira name drops Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
It made more sense that Prime Kira had no idea who he was, compared with like a next gen name drop of the original series crew, and they had no idea who Captain Kirk was. Like, really? Okay, It makes sense that an alien who, you know, had recently come into contact with the Federation didn't know.
I remember seeing that episode back in, 90, whenever it aired for the first time. And when she goes to Bashir, she's like, do you know somebody named Kirk? He's like, Kirk, the transporter. I'm like, yes, sweet. Yeah. I remember geeking out at that big time.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very nicely put by, of course, Bashir would be like the history guy in that particular jaunt. So yeah, that was fun. Well, as for me, one of the things that I did, and I think I sent you guys a picture, but for the people who aren't on our Discovery Debrief Senior Officers chat line, one of the things that I did when I came home from the holidays, my in-laws were actually holding on to my 2-disc special edition DVDs of all original 10 Star Trek films, including the director's edition of the motion picture. And the reason that I wanted to bring those home with me to Illinois was because there are really excellent text commentaries on every one of those movies by Michael Okuda, who worked on the franchise for years and who's one of the co-writers of the awesome Star Trek Encyclopedia. And it's just filled with great information. And Rachel had never seen those before. So when we were actually in Washington State at the end of December and into the first couple of days of January, we had started to watch the motion pictures text commentary, and we finished that one here. So I'm actually looking forward to getting to the other 9 movies and reminiscing a little bit about what kinds of factoids, because it's actually pretty fascinating. If you can find those 2-disc special edition DVDs of the first 10 films, like if you're at a half-price books or you're at a pawn shop or something and you see 1 or 2 here or there, consider picking them up, because the 480p doesn't necessarily stretch very well, especially if you got a 4K TV, but those text commentaries are pretty awesome, especially if you love just taking in factoids about the show, about the entire franchise, really. But another thing that Rachel and I did, we watched a pretty engaging take on an aspect of the Star Trek franchise in the form of the new Black Mirror season premiere called the USS Callister. Did you guys have a chance to watch that?
Mm-hmm. I know of it. I haven't seen it yet, though.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because, Black Mirror as a show, it's kind of like a dark and twisted earthbound Twilight Zone, in the sense that it presents these really dystopic visions of mostly the present, I think, anyway. Wouldn't you say?
Like near future.
Yeah, present, near future type of scenario. But it certainly doesn't lean a lot on aspects that we find commonplace in the Star Trek franchise about the higher aspirational qualities of humanity, let's say. So, like, for instance, one of the episodes of Black Mirror that actually features this same actor that plays General Hux in the current Star Wars movies, he played a husband to the actresses who played Haley Atwell, who played Agent Carter in the Marvel films. So they were a married couple, and he gets killed, and she is having a significant amount of difficulty in coping with his death, and she finds this service that can comb his social media profiles and create an AI that's conversational based on everything that he left online. And so the story becomes, so she's sort of falling in maybe a healthy or an unhealthy love with this facsimile of her husband. And it gets even crazier when she's able to actually create a fake body for this AI. And it goes, so that's the kind of territory that the show goes into. But the Black Mirror episode that we watched that kind of deals with Star Trek is called USS Callister. And it very much kind of spoofs some aspects of the cheesiness of the original series. And I was expecting to go into it and not like it, because I thought it was going to try and deconstruct Star Trek in a way that might be, I don't know, offensive to my taste as a Star Trek fan. But it really wasn't that at all. It was more just, it kind of dealt with more themes of what does cruelty look like if someone seems nice on the outside, but they can take a version of you and treat it horribly away from prying eyes, the dark aspects of a person's psyche.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean,
don't know.
It's kind of hard to.
The Star Trek aspect it's really more of a setting than anything else,
like an idea that's explored. But it's definitely worth watching if for no other reason than the production value and design is very good. And tells a very interesting story. So if you're inclined, you got a free hour and a half, and you're looking for something that may not exactly reinforce your faith in humanity, but it's still a pretty interesting and engaging story, consider watching the USS Callister episode of the Black Mirror. But did you like it, Rach?
It's Black Mirror, so it didn't make me feel very good.
Right, yeah. Well,
and I also think the guy who writes Black Mirror is running out of ideas because he's really remixing a lot of ideas from previous episodes in this episode. But other than that, it was engaging and
sure, yeah. Like if you're a fan of Black Mirror, you might not necessarily see a significant amount of new ideas in this episode. But to its credit, there was an end to it that was certainly a lot more upbeat than I was expecting.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. But we have a couple of potentially consequential news items to talk about. So before we move on to our episode discussion, why don't we talk about some news? So according to a report in The Wrap, the Viacom Corporation, which is a parent company of Paramount Pictures, is considering merging with the CBS Corporation. And these two entities actually used to be one company until Viacom spun CBS off into its own corporation back in 2005. And so why am I bringing this up on a Star Trek show? Well, if this is pursued to completion, then it might have a rather adverse effect on the Star Trek franchise, because when the two entities were initially split, as we've discussed before on this show, Paramount retained control of the Star Trek film series, while CBS retained control of the franchise on TV. So if these two entities were combined into one again, then Star Trek, all of it, would be under one umbrella. And this is reportedly one of the reasons that J.J. Abrams took something of a backseat in the Trek franchise and went more towards Star Wars, because the fragmentation made it needlessly difficult to exploit its full potential in other endeavors, including multimedia and merchandising. So on the other hand, though, this follows a continuing trend of giant conglomerates basically just playing with each other and, trusts and things like that. So what do you guys think about this? Zaki, you had expressed before some frustration of the fragmentation of the Star Trek franchise specifically. So when you heard about this, what came to mind?
Oh, I was happy. I hope it happens. What I said before still applies. I think that cutting the baby in half was something that was catastrophic for both the film and the TV end. I think it needlessly fragments and creates a partition, a Berlin Wall kind of between two integral parts of Star Trek. I've never been somebody who says Star Trek should only be on TV or it should only be in movies. I think the flow back and forth was something that was helpful, and I think that notwithstanding Spock Prime being present in the Kelvin films to sort of root them as part of the overall franchise, they feel distant, and I feel like what an opportunity that hasn't been played up is, think about it. You could have had a TV miniseries set in the Prime timeline doing for the Kelvin movies what the IDW comics have done.
Sure.
And things like that. There was an opportunity for flow back and forth that was not available to them. Not to say that they would have necessarily done that, but they didn't even have the option to do it because of this stupid corporate sequester,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Rachel?
Okay. First of all, I don't believe that J.J. Abrams went to Star Wars because of this. I think he went to Star Wars instead of Star Trek because he loves Star Wars with all of his heart.
let me qualify that a little bit before you continue. Not solely this, but Abrams is an astute businessman. And I think that he did actively get frustrated at the idea of not being able to exploit the merchandising potential of his recharacterization of Star Trek to its full potential.
Okay. Sure. But yeah, I think it's good that they could be under the same roof. That's cool. But I'm always like a little freaked out when giant corporations start to combine into even gianter corporations. It kind of isn't usually good for us as consumers. But in this case, maybe it's good for us as Star Trek consumers. Yeah. But in other ways, I'm not sure that it'll be so good.
Sure. Cicero, how about you?
Everything old becomes new again. As a person who has more grays than he'd care to admit, I've seen Ma Bell break up into smaller bells. I've seen those smaller bells reform and become Verizon. I've seen these things happen, and history just continues to repeat itself. When it comes to Star Trek, it makes sense to have everything under one umbrella. And I think the brilliance in the J.J. Abrams move, whether it was him as a director who also wrote, I'm not sure who wrote the original Star Trek, but created this Kelvin timeline. It allows itself to separate itself from any potential, TV in the future, because they do exist in separate timelines. So you don't have to worry about the film version of a character interfering or being even a different actor than a similar actor or the similar character on television, which I think is fantastic. I am not worried about this. Like, I don't think that Paramount's going to now charge us more money as a result of them now owning all of the rights. Like, I think for Star Trek specifically, this is a great thing, because now they have, all of the people that are concerned with the property, with the franchise, under one roof, under one umbrella.
Yeah. And, I'm inclined to agree, because on further reflection, you think of what the relationship was like between the first 10 films and the television side of Star Trek, and particularly during the Next Generation years, is very, very interwoven. You had the Next Generation cast basically graduate up into the feature division, and you had at least one cast member who was a member of both the feature cast and one of the primary shows at the same time. And those first 10 films, the run of those ended in 2002, 3 years before the two entities split the first time. And what have we had since then? We've had a series of movies that were very separate from any other kind of endeavor with the Star Trek franchise. Obviously, there hasn't been a TV show since then either, but now that there is, maybe we'll be able to see more intertwining. I'm not necessarily worried about the trust aspect in this specific instance, only because these were two entities that were formerly one entity before anyway, and it would just basically be returning to a status quo that we've all known in the past. It's not like the 20th Century Fox and Disney deal, far from it, at least as far as my perceptions are concerned. But think about how when Star Trek was so prevalent in the 1990s in particular, and you had movies coming out and you had multiple shows on the air, you had tons and tons of consumer products. Obviously, Star Trek merchandising hasn't been nearly as inundating, I guess, as Star Wars merchandising, but it was much heavier in the 90s than it probably ever was before, even in the 80s when it started to regain its popularity. So having more stuff for Star Trek out in the wild will probably just help to keep the franchise alive in people's minds. And as someone who's pro Star Trek, as I've said multiple times on this show, probably a good thing, but we'll have to see what actually finally shakes out of this. So we'll see. We will see. One other item that I wanted to bring up that's actually kind of multiple sub-items. Discovery producer Ted Sullivan has taken to Twitter and kind of answered an impromptu Q&A about last week's episode of the show, Despite Yourself. And here's some of the bits of information that he divulged. Someone asked about the discrepancy between the design of the USS Defiant as seen in last week's schematic and the regular appearance of TOS Constitution-class ships. And he basically said, yep, it's been modified by the Terran Empire over the course of the last century, which we pretty much thought, at least mostly thought. Rachel had to convince me that that was the case, but now she's been proven correct. Again.
Are you sure I was correct?
Yes, you were correct.
Hashtag Rachel was right.
Rachel was right. I'm pretty sure that you were right. I'll listen back, but that's, I guess maybe that's just the
remember what I say.
Maybe that's just the default now. I don't know. Just Rachel's right. Sullivan also defended the new visual takes on alien species like the Klingons, the Tellarites, and the Andorians by simply chalking it up to having a bigger budget and appealing to a global audience, as well as saying that there's a reason they decided to set the series pre-TOS. So for the people who are still sticklers about this not being a post-Voyager, post-Nemesis take on the franchise, there's a larger narrative aim, according to Mr. Sullivan. He also dismissed the idea of characterizing characters in the mirror universe through rampant promiscuity, which is something that Mirror Mirror kind of hinted at. Obviously, didn't take that idea very far, but he said that people who were just rampantly promiscuous, and that's the dividing line, was kind of a crutch in lieu of actual consequential character differences between Prime and Mirror characters. When answering if other legacy characters from previous shows could appear, he seemed open to the possibility as long as it would be, quote, more than nostalgia. And the only character he named when asked what he'd like to see, he said, quote, I'd be curious to see how the team dealt with a Q. Kind of an interesting thought. He also related that ancillary characters, including Kayla Detmer, Ariam, and Reese, would be getting more screen time in Season 2. And also the writers have apparently been working on Season 2 since at least November. So out of any of these, do you guys have any additional thoughts that spring to mind? Cicero?
So I guess my first thought was about something that you only kind of glanced on, or touched on, was this whole idea of the technology and stylistic choices. Now, I don't take exception to stylistic choices with the ships. If you wanna touch them up just a little, to make them not look as angular, make TOS era starships not look as angular as they did in the original series, I don't have a problem with that. It makes sense now. Like we know better. The one thing that I've continually harped on was the fact that they, the uniforms are dramatically different, and the technology that they use is far more advanced than the technology used in TOS. And he said that there was a reason, so I'm still, and again, that's kind of what I've been holding on to. But the other part was that he said, hey, our budget is bigger, so we're able to do things in a much more experienced way, in a much more realistic way than we were able to do, or the creators then were able to do 50 years ago.
Right.
So I'm okay with that, I guess. But there still needs to be an explanation, I think.
Yeah, sure. Understandable. Zaki, how about you? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm willing to roll with most of that stuff. I think the question that I was most intrigued by was his answer for why the Defiant looks slightly different, when we see it now. And I figured it was something along the lines of what he said. For stuff like that, I'm kind of like, they should have some kind of canonical explanation, not because I'm like a super stickler for continuity, but I mean, I think just for the sake of consistency, where the design of the original Constitution class ship is sort of baked into the cake.
Right.
And so to me, to change that willy-nilly outside of, like the excuse that you have with like a timeline reset, is something that I like the fact that they're saying, yeah, I mean, it's the same ship, but they've tweaked it or whatever. To me, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
you don't tug on Superman's cape without a reason for it, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Rachel, any thoughts about these?
I like that they're leaning away from the promiscuity in the mirror universe as being a defining characteristic, because it didn't make sense to me when I was thinking about it, because like if everybody exists, then that means that everybody's parents had to have gotten together and had them, and then if you were like if everybody was just like having sex with everybody all the time in the mirror universe, then there would be like different combinations of people,
right?
And there wouldn't be your mirror counterparts because of all, I don't know, it was like freaking out my like, I was like, they have to be close enough together that at least all of the same people are together at the same points enough that the same people are born,
right?
Which kind of messes with my head.
Well, that's also not taking into account possible advances in contraception by the time we get to the 23rd century, right?
Right.
Oh,
but
man,
like the mirror universe people, if they're all evil, why would they ever have babies at all?
I don't know. Maybe there's personal profit in it in some fashion.
The emperor wants them to.
Further the Terran Empire. You can't have it last for just the generation.
The emperor goes on international television and says, "I did my part, now you do yours." Right? Yeah, Cicero gets it.
I don't get it. But anyway, just in general, like we shouldn't equate promiscuity with evil.
Yeah, well, but also too, I mean, it is. He's probably correct in saying that it's a crutch. Well, how can we make this the evil universe? Sure. Well, let's just make everyone sleep around. Right. But I mean, I think these episodes in particular have demonstrated, there's more to being on the other side of the coin than just like this mustache twirling conception of what's constituted as evil in the 1950s. Right. I mean, there's more to it than that. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. It's a more nuanced, but I kind of like the mustache twirly.
Well, sure. I mean, there's still a little bit of that because that's
Sarek's got he's got the goatee.
Sarek's got the goatee, right? He can twirl it if he wants to. But I mean, it's kind of the aspect of mustache twirling is sort of baked into what the mirror universe is kind of supposed to be. At least to a point.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I guess the only one that kind of got at me, I was really sort of engaged at how, I don't know why this is what I took the most from the most recent episode, but the redesign of the Tellarites was something that I thought was really interesting. Right. Because the Tellarites, in the original series, they look pretty goofy. And in Enterprise, they certainly look better, but here they look kind of fearsome, and that kind of matches what I've always thought of a Tellarite's demeanor. It's supposed to be kind of threatening. So I thought that was really cool. And yeah, it just makes sense that, you have more money to spend per episode, pour some of it in the makeup and see what you can do. It still retains sort of the core elements of what the looks are. Particularly in the cases of the Andorians, but the Tellarites I thought were a pretty cool redesign.
Right, and so, I just want to say that just in general that I think a good rule of thumb, or at least a rule of thumb that I live by, is when you are looking at something, you're looking at fandom that is decades old, a generation old, and then people create new iterations of that. As long as I look, when I'm looking at a character or a race of beings or a ship that is famous within that fandom, it could be different as long as I can tell immediately who that is supposed to be, whether that's supposed to be an iconic ship, whether it's supposed to be an iconic race. And, you know, like the Tellarites and even the Andorians to a certain extent, they look better and but they are immediately recognizable. And I can appreciate that. And I won't deride any creator for doing that. I
feel like the Klingons kind of failed the test then based on that.
Yes.
Discovery.
Yes. And quite honestly, I'm still waiting for the explanation. You know, we've gotten so into the weeds with Valk and L'Rell and, you know, and the Light of Kalis and all this other stuff that burning question has kind of fallen to the wayside. And I think it is time to continue to hold their feet to the fire for that one. I will say though that TOS Klingons, or not TNG Klingons, had the worst hair. Their hair was the worst. So the fact that they got rid of that hair is not the worst thing in the world. They probably could have gotten better hair. I want to see a Klingon with like a bouffant or something like that.
Beehive.
I'm still waiting on seeing a Klingon that has hair that's, I guess, just like mine, like they had in TOS. You know, just short hair Klingon. Doesn't seem like those are particularly common. Right. You know, the Klingons don't really bother me per se, I guess, only because it seems like a further iteration of what we saw more specifically in Star Trek Into Darkness. You know, in Star Trek Into Darkness, we saw a Klingon's face on screen for all of like 2.5 minutes, I think. And it seemed like they were going with a slightly more reptilian design when we briefly saw that Klingon warrior. No hair on that guy's head, as far as I remember. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could argue that, or if I wanted to make an argument, I guess I would say, okay, well, what's the most visually identifying feature of a Klingon? And I would say, well, it's the ridges. And the ridges are certainly there, but you know, the more extreme ridges on Discovery Klingons combined with very inhuman complexions on the Klingons themselves makes for a wholly different vision of what a Klingon looks like, in addition to, you know, the changes in the skull structure. You know, the noses and sort of the cheekbones and the brows are all very, very more pronounced, but it still kind of seems Klingon in a way to me.
Right.
But maybe that isn't pushed forward enough to satisfy Star Trek fans at large. But it kind of just goes back to the point that you were making, Cicero. I mean, there's a reason why every iteration you see of Batman has the horns on his mask.
Right.
You know, that's Batman. It's easy to see, oh, that's Batman. And in this instance, for me, I could sort of say, oh, yeah, I think that's a Klingon. But it certainly wasn't as clear cut as it is for, let's say, the Andorians that we saw this past week, or the Tellarites even, for that matter, even though that was also kind of a departure. But there's a whole lot of things that we could probably say about this aspect specifically, and it would be a fascinating conversation, but we do have a hell of an episode to talk about. So why don't we move on to our discussion for Star Trek Discovery, Episode 11, The Wolf Inside. So we get a glimpse at what Michael's life is like posing as captain of the ISS Shenzhou. She clearly feels that the darkness and horror of this universe is getting to her, but is allowed one quieter moment by being pampered, massaged, and bathed by an alien slave, which happens to be the mirror universe counterpart of Saru. This is quickly disrupted by fulfilling some of her duties as captain, which includes overseeing the execution of prisoners who committed crimes of thought against the Terran Empire. And I guess more specifically against the Terran Emperor. So this is a pretty long teaser. This episode had quite a bit of runtime before we even got to the opening credits. 14 minutes in length, which is the longest teaser in the history of the Star Trek franchise. And it really seems like it's driving deeper into the ideas and people in the mirror universe more than any other journey the franchise has taken here. So, Zaki, I wanted to start with you because given some of the grievances and trepidation that you had expressed last week in classifying all mirror episodes as generally inferior to Mirror Mirror on TOS, did this opening specifically, just the first 14, 15 minutes of this episode, show you anything that might give you an impression that Discovery was aiming for something that other Mirror Universe episodes outside of TOS's had not aimed for in the past?
If I'm being honest, no, it didn't, and I think for two reasons. Part of that is because Mirror Mirror is at its core a really great one-off gimmick that they found a way to sort of sequelize into infinity, right? So it goes to what I said earlier about just it's you can't catch lightning in a bottle that way. I think the other concern I have with doing a mirror episode on this show, number one, what I said before, where I'm like, it takes away the uniqueness of the Enterprise being the first crew to encounter this. And second, it's taking us to this darker place, and the idea is it's trying to show Burnham who's like, I'm trying to keep myself from getting pulled in here and changing who I am or whatever. The problem is we're like, 7 episodes into the show. Like, it's just too soon. We don't have a clear enough sense of who Burnham or any of these characters are really for the effect the mirror universe is having on her/them to be as compelling as I think it could be. And I think that's just I just think it's too soon, if at all. Like, to me, this is like season 2 or 3. You wait,
Sure. That's something to work up to as opposed to right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Rachel, how about you? Compared with other mirror universe jaunts and what we saw in the opening of this one.
It's fine. It's comparable, I think.
It's comparable.
Yeah, well, maybe not to like TOS, but like to Deep Space Nine, it's fine. I kind of agree with Zaki about it. It's that in not liking the mirror universe aspect of it as much. I kind of found myself sort of wishing they could get back. I was just like, come on, can you just kind of get back to the real universe
now? We have a war to fight.
Yeah, I don't know. I just, the dawning realization that this is going to be at least 3 episode, probably entire rest of the season arc, was a little bit disappointing for me. And I really loved all of the aspects of this episode that like didn't have to do strictly with the fact that it's the mirror universe. And also, was that Saru or was it just a Kelpian?
No, I'm pretty sure it was Saru. Just because it was very much Doug Jones that was doing it.
Yeah, but we've never seen any other Kelpians. Maybe they all are.
That's
Doug
true.
Jones.
That's true.
When
you're right, you're right. Cicero, how about you, man? What do you think about this opening 15-minute salvo and compared with other mirror universe jaunts?
So, I understand exactly what Zaki was saying, and I agree to a point, but then I disagree. So I don't know, like maybe mirror universe Cicero agrees completely with Zaki, but I enjoyed the fact that that we don't know how much time has passed. We don't know how long they've been in the mirror universe. So that the fact that we're getting a captain's log from Burnham, and she's kind of talking about the fact that she's losing some of her prime universe humanity. That humanity is completely redefined, and it's not that she's a crew member on a starship in an evil universe. She is the decision maker on this ship, and the fact that she hasn't had, she has, much like Tilly, has dreamt about having command. and understands the weight of command and has had these ambitions for command. And now she finally gets it, and she gets it in the worst circumstances possible. And now she's having to live a lie while fulfilling a dream, and having to deal with having to make decisions as this other person.
Sure.
So like all of those things are weighing upon her, while she's trying to figure out the best way to get home. So like, I really felt that. I really felt that from her. I really felt that in the narration. Yes, I do agree with Zaki that had this been season 2 or season 3, God willing, that it would have been more emotionally impactful, because you have a full breadth of who Michael Burnham is at that particular moment. But I feel comfortable enough with saying that I know who she is at this point, that it was a tough moment for her.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm inclined to agree with you, only because if there is anything that I feel the mirror universe never sufficiently explored in every other appearance that it's had, it's having a sense of dramatic weight to it. I mean, in some respects, like in Deep Space Nine, in the episode where Sisko had to pose as his counterpart, he lost himself in that role. It was almost like he was having fun with the idea of playing this sort of dastardly version of himself. And, the other DS9 episodes had kind of that sense of separation that we had alluded to before. And Enterprise, since it strictly dealt with people who were indigenous to the mirror universe, as opposed to an incursion from the Prime universe in observing how different things are, it was people who had just lived in that world and were totally fine and conducting themselves in the way that normal mirror universe people conduct themselves. Right. But with this, it actually feels like it has a weight to it, where it's trying to sort of wrestle with the moral complications that come with observing this kind of behavior and, floating under the radar and trying to push forward this vision of something that you are very much not, but that you have to express this sort of strength in order to maintain respect and fear among your subordinates in this instance. That to me seems like it's got quite a bit of dramatic heft to it. That's not to say that it wouldn't be served well by, building up to potentially a more rewarding jaunt into the mirror universe into the future. I would be surprised if after this, presuming Discovery gets 4, 5, 6, or 7 seasons, I would be surprised if we returned to the mirror universe in the future. Knock on wood. I think they've kind of done all they can in these few episodes that we're getting. But for what we are getting, the illustration of the mirror universe and the conflict that the characters that we know, which Zaki's correct, not well, but we do know them, I think, enough. It's kind of nice to see some actual weight in this location that we all know so well. So that, to me, is what's refreshing about the Discovery take on the mirror universe just on its own. But it definitely appears as though, the realities of living in the mirror universe, even for a relatively short amount of time, are taking their toll on Michael's psyche. So do you think that she'll be able to come out of this ordeal unchanged, or is this going to change her? Because, as she says, it's getting easier to live here. And Zaki, I want to throw it to you first. And I guess the only thing that I would try and bring up before you answer is this maybe going to be Michael's Xindi conflict Archer kind of moment, or is she going to overcome this?
I mean, I think it'll change her. But I mean, that comparison right there, like that transformation that Archer goes through is only really effective because we've had, 48 episodes of, classic Archer classic.
Sure.
And so again, it's one of those things where I absolutely think that it whatever contortions they're doing is going to be something good for the drama of the show. But I mean, let's face it, we're halfway through the first season, and the majority of the characters are ciphers, and that's been, I don't say that as a ding on it. I'm like, that's been the process of, no pun intended, Discovery is sort of going through, and we're like, oh, we learned this about Michael, and we learned this, and obviously Lorca is just like Captain Question Mark, right? And so the problem I see here is, I still don't feel like I know Michael well enough to be like on the flip side of this, to be like, oh, you see how this changed her. Like, I just don't feel like I can really get my arms around it all the way yet.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Cicero, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that, again, Zaki was right. I mean, Zaki's observation is pretty on point. The one thing that I will say is that I do think that, obviously she will be changed, but the part of the reason that she'll be changed is because of who the Emperor is.
Sure.
And it's just the conflict within herself, for having to kind of, resolve the fact that she feels, that she deeply betrayed this woman, the effigy of this woman who is now the Emperor in this mirror universe, but also the fact that she reveres the effigy of this woman who is now the Emperor in the mirror universe. And the conflict of that coming right off of the conflict of the very first and only romantic love of her life, and and how that how all of that transpired is going to fundamentally change her, maybe in a way that that would make her Archer-esque.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Rachel?
Yeah, I don't see how she can go through all of this stuff and not be changed in some significant way. My hope for her is that something that happens in the mirror universe with her and Giorgio can bring her some sort of sense of closure or healing. I don't know that that's what characters in dramatic series usually get, but I would, as one human to another, that's what I would want. I do like that she is able to blend in. I think like one thing that kind of annoys me about sort of mistaken identity kind of plots, or like plots where you have to pretend to be someone you're not, and the person just like the character sucks at it, and you're like, come on, like I could totally like pretend to be evil, right? And so I like that like Michael is able to step into her role and in a way that feels realistic.
Well, and I think that's part of where her Vulcan training kicks in is, she's an academic at heart. She's very good at memorizing factoids, and she's very good at sort of embodying those. I mean, she learned the regulations pretty well on the spot in the Terran Empire, so that I'm sure that skill lends itself to the act of blending in. I mean, I don't really know. Yes, this may change her, but from my perspective, I kind of think that it's going to end up being more of a trial by fire more than a deconstruction, where her outlook that we're already familiar with will instead become stronger, as opposed to being actively weakened by her time in the mirror universe. At least, that's, I don't have a crystal ball or anything, but that's kind of my hope. But let's move along with the plot a little bit. The ISS Shenzhou is contacted by the Empire, and given the coordinates of the Resistance leadership, Michael is ordered to pursue Terran Imperial General Order 4. Any exotic species deemed a threat to the Imperial supremacy will be extinguished without prejudice, and her orders are then to kill the Resistance's leadership by the command of the Emperor. Burnham, nervous about the idea of killing the only alliance in this universe that looks anything like the interspecies unity of the Federation, consults Captain Lorca and comes up with a different plan. So this helps to give us a greater look at the sort of mechanics of the Empire. And it definitely reinforces what we learned about its governance from Spock back in the original series. Terror must be maintained or the Empire is doomed, I think is what he said. So how did learning about the Terran General Order shape your perception of the Imperial chain of command, if at all? Rachel?
It did not change my perception of the Imperial chain of command. That is exactly what I would expect them to have. Some sort of, like the Starfleet General Orders, except most of them are kill
this.
kill this,
kill
that.
this and run.
Yeah. Just use deadly force whenever possible.
Yeah, so. Sure. Zaki, I wonder, what is Terran General Order 1? I mean, holy crap.
You don't want to
know. Well, how did you like hearing what a Terran General Order sounded like? Did it surprise you at all, or was it pretty well in line with what you would expect?
Well, it didn't surprise me, and I didn't like it because it's horrifying, right? Obviously, but
sure, yeah, right.
But like Rachel said, I mean, it's right in line with exactly what we'd expect, especially where we're at in the history of the mirror universe, which is 10 years prior to when we first saw them, right? So it fits very neatly in between the Mirror Darkly episodes and Mirror. So I did like that, yeah.
Sure. Cicero?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't surprise me at all. I do wonder about General Order 1, but it's not Order 66, that's for sure.
Yeah, the Terran Prime Direct. I bet it has to do with like annexation of property, because I think in the last episode, Michael said that the Terran Empire is the hegemony of all known space.
Right.
So I bet it's just like aggressive expansion, right? You come upon a planet, you put the flag down and expand the empire, expand or die.
I mean, I guess that does make sense. I mean, what is the Federation's prime directive is not to interfere when they see a primitive species. So the Terran, the Imperial prime directive is probably always to interfere and subjugate.
Yeah. That would be a mirror image of the prime directive, I think, probably. Absolutely. Well, Captain Lorca seems a little worse for wear in this episode, especially at this point in the episode. But he also seems to have enough presence of mind to know when his torture might be affecting his judgment. Why do you think that is? Is Lorca just made of something tough, or is it possible that he's experienced an agony booth before? Zaki, what do you think?
Well, I hope it's the latter. I've been, again, we've discussed it before. Just the idea that he's like a fugitive from the mirror universe just feels so tacky to me that if that's the direction they go, I will have a visceral disgust at that. I think they've created such a shaded and really just so many shades of gray character that to me, it makes more sense that he's just this is one aspect of him that we can look at, that in a crunch, he knows how to be a leader. Like that's a positive. So I hope that that's in fact what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of dimension to him. But for the record, I'll just say right now, if it does end up that this has been Mirror Lorca all along, as you possibly dread, yes, I'll have to mark out at least 5 minutes in a future episode after that revelation is made for you just to go off.
Just a rant.
Right? Just to rant. So, so you just be prepared for that if and when the situation arises. Rachel, what do you think?
I'm coming around to the idea that Lorca is Mirror Lorca.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, I just felt like some of his facial expressions in this episode were, I don't know, a little bit knowing. Sure. Like when she's like, "Oh, I don't want to kill those people." I'm gonna go down to the planet. I feel like his response was like the Emperor's gonna get you.
Ooh.
like he knew more. I don't know. I just feel like he seems to know more about the mirror universe.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's possible too that maybe instead of being from there, that he has just been there.
It's true. It's consistent with my fanboy hypothesis that he's a fan of the mirror universe.
He's studying the warfare aspect because he certainly is a fan of that. That's for sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We will see. Cicero, how about you?
Yeah, it's look, I'm not surprised by anything anymore. I've already last week explained that I felt like Captain Lorca was the old black guy in every horror film who knows the sage, who has all of the sage advice. There's just a knowing. There has been a knowing way about our very complex favorite captain for Discovery, at least, Gabriel Lorca, and as much to Zaki's chagrin, I really do believe that he is the mirror universe, and he's just home now.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Which I will say this. I will say this. If that does in fact turn out to be the case, it will at the very least justify this show going there so soon.
Sure.
So,
okay. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. We'll have to see. I mean, I guess I should give props to the writers of the show thus far, because it's not entirely clear exactly where they're going yet. And that's not something you can necessarily say of other shows on TV. I mean, it looks like it might be leaning in that direction, but it's not a sure thing by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that a similar kind of feeling is also pertinent to Vok and Ash Tyler. I mean, we had to do quite a bit of digging to indicate what that revelation would probably be, but the writing of the show itself did a pretty good job of keeping its cards close to the proverbial chest. So at least there is that. But we'll have to see if the show actually does give us a reason for, maybe that's the segment, like an old radio show, Zaki's agony booth. And we have to just let it all out and see where things go. All right, well, let's move along with the plot a little bit. So Burnham and Tyler travel as a landing party to the coordinates of the Resistance themselves without anybody else. And instead of leading a destructive charge, they instead surrender to the Resistance in hopes of learning how the Klingons of this universe have learned to work with other species, which might potentially give them an advantage diplomatically in the Prime universe. Upon beaming down to the surface and meeting the Resistance leader, they discover that it's led by the mirror counterpart of Vok. Burnham offers to give the group time to escape before their base is destroyed, but because the Resistance doubts the word of a Terran, the mirror Vok summons the mirror Sarek, who performs a mind meld on Michael and confirms to the rest of the Resistance that she can in fact be trusted. Listening to Vok speak, particularly about Kahless, triggers Tyler's programming, and he has to be restrained, putting the operation at risk. The two versions of Vok clash before being separated. Wow. Well, first of all, what did you guys make of the revelations concerning the Resistance's leadership? Not just that it's led by the mirror counterpart to Vok, but that Sarek is seen as a prophet on a diametrically opposed side to the Empire, because obviously we know where his son in this universe lays his loyalties. So did you guys find that surprising at all? Cicero, how about you first?
No, I didn't find it surprising. I found it a little bit convenient that all the major players in the Prime universe were also major players, or major players in the mirror universe. But obviously that's what you got to do, right? So, I didn't think too much into where the history behind where, especially where Spock was, it didn't even occur to me until you said something right now. But, so I was just okay with the fact that, like, okay, this is where these guys are. This is who they are. And of course I got to bring them out and, deal with, our prime characters, our heroes. So that was cool. The thing that I thought was weird was why, Burnham felt like she could glean any insights from the Mirror Universe Klingons about how to, treat with the prime Klingons, especially given the fact that they're, allegedly their motivations are completely opposite. Mm-hmm. So asking the probing questions about, isn't this against the will of, like, doesn't Kalis say Klingons first? Wouldn't Kalis in the Mirror Universe say Klingons and everybody? So I mean, those are kind of the questions that you wind up asking yourself, or at least I wind up asking myself when I'm watching and I'm listening to these things, and I'm trying to immerse myself in the goings ons of the episode.
Yeah, sure. Zaki, what do you think about all this?
It's nice because it's queuing up a lot of questions, and I like that we're getting these sort of dribs and drabs of what life is like in the Mirror Universe, and I like that. Like, they haven't done like the Doc Brown chalkboard thing that sort of laying the whole thing out, because that was one thing I didn't like in the previous episode, where it was like Burnham pulled up the Star Trek Wikipedia page and just was like, oh, in the Mirror Universe this and this,
right.
And I like that there's some surprises. It's funny because as far as Vok being the leader, and him, Ash Tyler encountering him, that the revelation of that hit me at a nice place, because I'm sitting here watching it with my wife, who is a very patient person. She puts up with me being a Star Trek fan, so she's kind of like, so what's going on here? So what's and I'm like explaining the Mirror Universe. I'm like, well, see, no, because Burnham, she's like the mirror duplicate, and she's like, well, where's her mirror version? I'm like, well, she's dead, and I'm like explaining, and so she points to Tyler, and she's like, well, where's his mirror version? And I'm like, well, he doesn't have one because. Because so I'm like, and it's literally as they're beaming down to meet this unseen Klingon, and I'm like, I'll bet you any amount of money, and it turned out to be him. So that timing was fortuitous in that regard. So, and I love the symmetry of of the Vulcans always having the goatees, because they did the same thing with what's his face, Gary Graham on Enterprise. Saval,
yeah.
And I love the I mean, people say they're not paying attention to continuity. Come on. What is that?
Right.
That's like inside baseball, and they're really doing it.
Oh, so totally.
I love that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Rachel.
Well, so with respect to your Sarek and Spock sort of musing, I think that like some things are opposite in the Mirror Universe, but like generally people's life courses have to parallel each other in some respect. And so in the Mirror Universe, it makes sense that Sarek and Spock would have to have some sort of like massive falling out, and it's probably over something to do with the Terran Empire in this universe, right? As opposed to Starfleet. So yeah, like I thought that was cool. I did kind of feel like we're gonna get intel on why the Klingons aren't xenophobic. That was a little bit of a convenient plot device for me. I wish it had maybe made a little bit more sense. I feel like it really doesn't take that much strategic thinking to think that necessity when like obviously sort of these religious teachings of Kalis, like all religious teachings are a bit fungible when you need to bend the rules to survive. So I feel like you could kind of reason that out. There's no like huge giant mystery that the Klingons are like these great immovable creatures that can never, ever, ever work with anyone. Maybe that, I don't know, maybe that's what she thought, but I feel like it was obvious to me.
Well, and it's certainly not a one-to-one reflection, right? I mean, because Mirror Sarek didn't seem to have any greater degree of familiarity with Michael than anyone else. So Michael's parents probably survived in the Mirror universe. At least you might be able to assume that, possibly. But no, I think your point about Spock and Sarek splitting up is definitely well taken, and it's very much in line with what we are familiar with in the Prime universe as far as their very complicated relationship is concerned. So, and yes, and Zaki's absolutely right. It just shows that they are paying attention, contrary to the belief of some in the Star Trek fan community. I mean, they would have to in order to be able to sort of draw those lines without actually explicitly drawing those lines, which is kind of cool. And again, Tellarites and Andorians looked pretty awesome. And I also, in a weird way, you know, I kind of wonder, it was in the back of my mind when I saw the meeting of the Resistance, you know, is this potentially going to be the foundation of what becomes the Klingon-Cardassian alliance? Because obviously that is a union of disparate species that band together in order to try and stop the onslaught of the Terrans, and in the future they succeed. So is this potentially the building block of something like that? Kind of a cool question, but certainly not something that Discovery needs to get anywhere near close to answering. But let's move along, of course. So back on the ship, Tyler reveals to Burnham that he now knows who he is. Vok, son of None. Dun, dun, dun.
Really? Get out of here. Whoa. What a confirmation.
That is brand new information.
So he's finally starting to realize that he did undergo surgery to appear human and to infiltrate Starfleet, and specifically Discovery. He fully convinces her of his true identity when he describes his fight with her on the Ship of the Dead when Takuma was killed, and a fight ensues that sees Vok nearly kill Burnham. She's saved by the mirror counterpart to Saru, and Tyler, quote-unquote Tyler, is arrested and sentenced to death for attempting to kill his captain by the Terran Empire. Burnham has him beamed into space, where he's almost instantaneously beamed aboard the USS Discovery. Saru and Tilly imprison him after having earlier found the body of Dr. Culber. So obviously I did kind of gloss over the stuff concerning Saru and Tilly and Culber and Stamets. We'll get to that in a second, but the implication earlier in the episode was that Stamets, perhaps not in control of himself, killed Dr. Culber, but apparently by the end of the episode, Burnham was able to communicate, no, it was actually this Klingon in disguise that had killed Dr. Culber, and Vok is then imprisoned aboard Discovery, potentially next door to his favorite buddy, L'Rell. So things seem to be coming to a head concerning Vok and potentially his status as a heavy hitter adversary on this show now that Call is out of the way. So is Prime Vok / Tyler's instability enough to make you doubt where he will ultimately end up? Or do you see his position as a big bad on the show, potentially more galvanized after his self-revelation and after murdering Dr. Culber and after taking full responsibility of who he really is? Zaki, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. I thought the confrontation between them after he has fully Klingonized, whatever. I thought it was really effective. I mean, he's playing this mind game with her, and it reminded me, like the way she played it, it reminded me of Buffy, like after Angel turns into Angelus. I don't know if you guys are Buffy fans.
Right.
Rachel is.
Ring the bell.
I mean, I watched it once.
But
yeah, it is like that. You're right.
I mean, certainly the in terms of the hurt that because it's a betrayal, it's a personal betrayal, right? And it also, by the end of the episode, I was like, I don't think Ash Tyler comes back after this. And I said that last time. I was like, I think killing Dr. Culber, that's the that's the equivalent of like in Star Wars, Kylo Ren killed Han Solo. He doesn't get redeemed. Like that. Across the line. So to me, I sort of see Ash Tyler being a little bit like, what's his name? Agent Ward on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. If you guys watched that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know, where we thought he was a good guy, he's not, and from now he's going to be one of the big bads. That's my prediction, and we'll see how wrong I am. You know, in the weeks and months ahead.
Sure. Well, so do you think then that do you think Ash Tyler is still in there at all, or is this going to be completely superseded by the disciple of Takuma?
I think to whatever extent he's in there is irrelevant, except as like knowledge that Vok can draw on, you know, against the Federation.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Rachel, what do you think about all of this finally coming to a head?
Yay! Everything's out in the open. And I was right. Hashtag Rachel was right. Javid Iqbal is a relation of Shazad Latif. That's his father's name.
Oh,
wow.
And he passed away a few years ago.
Oh.
And so Shazad chose that as the fake name to honor his father.
Oh,
That's nice.
that's beautiful.
But also, hashtag Cicero was right, because it did appear that the subtext of the in this episode was that the reason that his sort of Vok programming didn't come through right away was his love for Michael.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what he was, I believe, what he was saying.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree that scene was, you know, A+ acting by both Shazad Latif and Sonequa.
Mm-hmm.
It was really, really sad and upsetting.
Yeah, it was.
And I like that, because even though I knew it was coming, it was still, you know, hard to watch and fun to watch. It was fun to watch him fight Vok,
Mm-hmm.
mere Vok, like a Vok on Vok. I don't think I agree with Zaki. I don't think Ash Tyler's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way that everything was played, it seems like he's full Vok
Mm-hmm.
and is going to be the bad guy or a bad guy.
You never go full Vok.
Right.
He certainly didn't seem to express a lot of love loss for Michael on the transporter pad before he was beamed into space. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Cicero, you got to have thoughts about this, man. I mean, you were the one who brought this whole thing to our attention in the first place.
So first things first, I love the Clark Kent Superman 3-esque fight between Ash Tyler and Volk.
Nice invocation, by the way.
Cut. I love it.
Thank you. Clearly one of my favorite moments in all of cinema is just that cheesy fight is amazing. But just the fact that, like, hearing Ash Tyler speak Klingon and be the representation of quote unquote real Klingons against his, you know, his mirror image, and Volk was, you know, and having Volk only speak English during that fight was really, really amazing. I really love that. And then to have this revelation that happens in the captain's quarters between these two lovers, you know, my heart broke for both of them. You know, like, just because you know, for Burnham, this is her everything. If you think, you know, if everyone thinks back to the first time that you were in love, and, you know, the heartache of that love ending, to be in the moment, and that, you know, not only is that person breaking your heart, but that person is breaking your heart and telling you they're a mortal enemy at the same time, is just got to be devastating. And then on top of that, here's a guy, as he's talking to the woman he loves, is telling her he's slipping away. You know, that he's effectively dying in front of her. And to, like you could feel it was, again, great acting across the board, and you could feel that pain, or at least I felt that pain while it was happening. And I do think he's he's redeemable. I think there is redemption there for Ash Tyler. I just want to believe. I believe in love, y'all. I believe in love. Yeah. So I mean, I definitely think that there is a chance for that to happen. I believe in love, and I believe in last week's Zaki, who said that in order for Dr. Kolber to come back, like in order for Tyler to come back, Dr. Kolber can't truly be dead, and I believe he's truly not dead, so he can come back. So Ash Tyler can come back.
Fair point.
Yeah. Now, what I will also say is, what an amazing amount of stealthy operation had to occur in order for Captain Burnham to contact Captain Tilly and give her the lowdown about everything prior to her walking to sentence Ash Tyler to death. That was, wherever that happened, that was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Well, Cicero, it's nice to know that you believe in a thing called love. Just listen to the rhythm of the heart. Right. Yeah. It's kind of hard for me to say one way or the other what I think is actually going to happen here, because they've really layered this in a way that I obviously the moment of revelation was not specifically surprising, but the surprise, I guess, that Burnham had, the way that Sonequa Martin Green played it, the emotion was palpable. I mean, all of you guys are absolutely right on when you describe the way that the scene itself goes over, because it definitely hits all of the right notes, and it was definitely, to me at least, probably the most enthralling scene in this episode. Maybe second only to the last image that we're left with, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So as far as kudos to Shazad Latif for effectively playing three characters in one episode, right, for all intents and purposes. Really. The guy has shown a considerable amount of dimension and skill in separating these three personalities that he's now played over the course of this first season. And, I was kind of with Zaki before when it comes to the expression of Klingon, but Zaki, I don't know about you, but the way that Shazad Latif, Ash Tyler, Vok, however you want to put it, speaks Klingon, especially in this episode, seemed really cool to me. Maybe it was because it was sardonic, but yeah, what do you think?
It worked for me in this episode because it is so horrifying, right? Sure. It sounds so guttural and disgusting almost, that hearing that coming out of this character we formed an attachment to, it hits us in the audience the same way it hits Michael. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think if all of that, those minutes upon minutes of just guttural nonsense were just to lay the pipe for this, hey, well played. I'll give a golf clap.
Yeah, especially, and I had alluded before to his parting words for her on the transporter pad. Not only the way that he delivers the line in Klingon, but the disdain on his face. Yeah, it's a total reversal from the almost worried sense of love that he had expressed before for Michael, and you really do feel the weight of the betrayal in that moment specifically. Like, you definitely feel it before their confrontation in Burnham's quarters, but there's something about that parting word that is still sort of sitting with me that I thought was played really, really well. And that's sort of what puts me in the camp of, okay, here's our big adversary now, but I'm still not quite sure. I'm still not totally able to commit to one side or the other, but that'll just make the experience of watching the episode next week all the more palpable. So let's move along. We're getting almost to the end here. So let's talk a little bit about, and I don't quite have this separated in what's in front of you, but Saru and Tilly attempt to bring Stamets' consciousness back into his body by using the spore network, but they apparently fail. During this process, within the mycelial network, the consciousness of both Mirror Stamets, who has a Master of Poisons medal, which I thought was cool, and Prime Stamets meet. And Mirror Stamets says to him, I wasn't sure you'd find your way here. What did you guys think of this moment specifically where you see, okay, so Stamets isn't quite back to normal, but there is something happening on the mycelial network, and there might be potentially some collaboration between Stamets and his mirror universe counterpart. Cicero, why don't we start with you?
Well, the first thing I thought was hashtag Chris was right, because it does now confirm that Mirror Discovery also has a spore drive.
That's true.
So,
yeah.
Right, exactly. So, so I thought that was cool, and I'm still not sure if Mirror Stamets is hashtag Groovy Stamets, or if regular Prime Stamets is Groovy Stamets, but I just want that guy to come back.
True enough.
I don't think Mirror Stamets is Groovy Stamets. That guy didn't look groovy to me.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe he sniffed too many poisons.
Right.
Who knows?
I think Groovy Stamets is from some other universe. Right. Maybe the Groovy universe.
The Groovyverse.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think, though, about the meeting of the Stametses?
Oh, it's intriguing. We'll have to see what's to come.
Yeah.
I don't have any judgments on it yet, but I'm really interested to see where that goes.
Zaki, you've been sort of hot and cold on Stamets over the course of this season, but I think you generally like him. Did this leave any impression with you?
No strong impression other than, obviously I'm curious to see what's going on with him. I will say that again, I was watching this episode with my wife and trying to explain the mycelial network and spore drive to somebody who's coming in virtually cold. I was a weeping. I was basically Stamets by the end of that. I was comatose with glassy eyes by the end of it.
There's darkness in the forest. There's darkness in the forest.
That was me by the end of that.
Don't go into the palace. Oh, very well said. Yeah, I mean, it just leaves a lot of. I think, if anything, the only impression that I'm left with is that, for whatever reason, I'm pretty sure that the spore drive and the plot lines related to it are probably going to be finished by the time we get to the end of this season. I really don't see this extending into the second season. If anything, Stamets seemed excited before in the Ready Room with Lorca about the idea of exploring alternate universes. This will probably teach them that maybe that's not such a good idea. And, maybe they should just stick to a significant amount of the unexplored galaxy in their own neighborhood. But, of course, we will have to wait and see. So, the big moment here. So back on the bridge of the Shenzhou, a ship comes out of nowhere and destroys the resistance on the planet's surface before they have the chance to escape that Burnham had promised them before. Burnham is reprimanded for not killing the resistance leaders immediately by the Emperor of the Terran Empire, which is revealed to be the Mirror Universe counterpart of Philippa Georgiou. "Don't you bow to your emperor?" she says. Lorca, now on the bridge, seems like he's smiling.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah.
Or he gives like a little indication of a smile before we're left to scratch our heads and wonder what the hell is going to happen next week. So, how did the revelation of the Emperor's identity strike you in the moment? Because we had all speculated something to this effect, but of course we weren't sure. So, Rachel, Emperor Georgiou.
It's like, it makes so much sense. I don't know why I wasn't more sure that.
Yeah, you visibly, or you audibly exclaimed when you saw her.
Yeah, well, it made so much sense because, in terms of character development, that's like the ultimate challenge for Michael is to have to, deal with her beloved mentor being this, I assume, evil emperor.
Yeah.
And also just like Michelle Yeoh looks so good.
Yeah.
Like she looks so evil.
She looks awesome.
And you only saw her for like 10, 15 seconds and you're like, that is a evil emperor right there. Like,
yeah.
It's just how, I guess it was the makeup or how she was carrying herself or something. I don't know.
And that draping robe that she was wearing was
very
pretty
regal.
Awesome. Very. Zaki, Emperor Giorgio.
So before they reveal her, I'm sitting with my wife and I'm like, I'll bet you it's Michelle Yeoh. And it was Michelle Yeoh. And I can't, I'm not genius enough to have been the only one that thought of this, right? Was this like out there in the ether? Because I was not surprised by it.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, we had speculated last week that it was probably her. Yeah. It would certainly make a lot of sense. We had also said other names like maybe Colbert, which would be pretty wild. Rachel had theorized it might be Admiral Cornwell. I was thinking maybe Emperor Ripper, which I'm still a little disappointed didn't actually happen.
I am too. Here's the one thought I have is sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but
no, please.
I'm wondering if they'll establish some kind of connection from Emperor Hoshi to Empress Giorgio.
Yeah, and that was something that I had speculated as well at the end of last week's shows. I wonder if they're either part of the same lineage, like if Giorgio might be Hoshi's granddaughter and that the imperial line has extended down to her, or if there's some other kind of connection, or if the maybe Emperor Giorgio had overtaken the imperial Sato dynasty, if you want to call it that. I mean, there's certainly a lot of possibilities. I hope that we get an answer, considering that we know that the Defiant is around. Right. We didn't see the ship that the Emperor was on. It would be pretty awesome if the official ship of the Emperor is the Defiant. I would love to see that.
Defiant. It's got to be.
Yeah. It's the most advanced ship in the fleet. Why wouldn't it?
Well,
why would?
But even now, 100 years later. Wait, no, because it's from their future.
Right,
okay,
it's from it's
where's Doc Brown and the chalkboard?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's probably 50. It's minus 15 at this point now.
You're right. Yeah, good call.
Yeah, true. So, yeah, I mean, it would certainly make a lot of sense if it was the Defiant. But yeah, I'm with you, Zaki. I mean, I hope that because we don't know for sure if Hoshi was successful in overtaking the Empire, but if the Defiant is still around, then she probably was.
Yeah.
So, it certainly leaves a lot of question marks surrounding a pretty interesting aspect of mirror universe continuity. So I'm right there with you. Cicero, in the moment, how did this strike you?
Oh, I was satisfied. We had heavily speculated this, and it came to fruition, and obviously from a character development standpoint, this is it's perfect. As Rachel kind of alluded to earlier, the fact that the final boss for Michael Burnham's journey through the wicked wizard of the wicked land of Oz in the mirror universe, which is kind of like if you can draw an analogy from this or to this from something else, it is Burnham's trip through the Wizard of Oz,
sure,
where all sorts of things have just kind of gone haywire. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense that the final boss is the person with whom the human with whom she found the most solace before Ash Tyler, and the person for whom she most wanted to emulate, and the person she most respected, the human she most respected. To see her, and who knows what she's gonna do? Is she going to use the logical aspect of her brain and realize that this isn't the person that she blames herself for dying, in the Prime universe? Is she going to look at her is she going to look at Georgiou as for some type of absolution for the sins that she has committed against her mirror counterpart in the Prime universe? Is she going to fall in line and become subservient to, clearly that's the least likely of things to happen, but it is likely for it to happen because she respects Philippa Georgiou so much. And if there are aspects of that person within the Emperor, it stands to reason that could happen for Burnham.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly don't think that Michael's going to come away from an encounter with the Imperial Georgiou unscathed. I don't think there's a lot of question, though, at least not in my mind, about how she will see the Imperial conception of her as sort of a perversion of this image of a person that she holds in such high regard. To me, all the question marks are around Lorca and that look that he gave.
Oh, totally.
Because on the one hand, you could say, okay, so he's familiar with her. But on the other hand, maybe this is fulfilling some aspect of the plan that we don't know about. And that is actually the Prime Lorca who is doing the scheming that we've become so accustomed to. It's just, there's so many question marks, and that's where most of the uncertainty in my head lies. I have a reasonable idea of how Michael is going to react to the idea of Emperor Georgiou, but you and I, all of us, I'm sure, saw the hint at next week. Lorca didn't exactly look like he was ready to bow, and he certainly didn't say that he was going to bow in front of the Emperor. But you wouldn't think that Mirror Lorca would also necessarily be happy to see someone that we are pretty sure he tried to overthrow either. So there's a lot of questions surrounding how Lorca is going to fit into all this, and I'll be really interested to see how that aspect of it ends up resolving itself. But of course, Michael, that's going to be a very good character building interaction. Rachel, you got something to add?
That little smile also is making me lean towards it's actually Mirror Universe Lorca, because for me that sort of acting choice fits in with the arc of Mirror Lorca, who has somehow, he's gone away, and then he has concocted some sort of scheme because he just really wants to overthrow the Emperor, and he's excited because now he's got another chance.
Okay,
that's
another
just
way to look into it.
How I was thinking about it, but maybe there's another explanation. I don't know.
What do you guys make of that look? Yeah, Cicero. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that my hypothesis is that Captain Lorca was a paramour of the Emperor. He turned on her, and she wanted to exact revenge. So, so I think that, obviously I'm more convinced now than ever, upon reflection, that this is Mirror Lorca, and that's who we've been dealing with all along.
Zaki, what do you make of that look and what we've been saying here?
So I saw the look and I was like, they're trying to make us think he's Mirror Lorca. I'm staking my claim. It's a weave, I tell you. It's a dodge. Yeah, that's the ticket. I have no idea. I will say that this show has a tendency to do the thing that you expect when it comes to some of these twists,
Right.
Sure.
So at this point, if they're laying the pipe for it being Mirror Lorca, I'm not going to be shocked. Let me put it that way.
Right.
Sure.
But based on the information we have right now, that smile could be interpreted in many different ways. And I will say that my immediate conclusion is not, he must be Mirror Lorca. It's, he's got something up his sleeve, but that's really all I'm able to intuit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to look on that smile once we have the context of next week's episode, because I'm sure that next week's is going to be particularly revelatory if I had to guess. Of course, I don't know for sure, but we will certainly be back next week, and we hope you come with us. So, final thoughts on this episode. Where do you guys stand now that we've seen a little more from this vision of the mirror universe, what it offers to the lineage of the Star Trek franchise, but probably more importantly, where it positions these characters and how educational it's been in teaching us about them specifically? Zaki?
I'm curious, a lot of questions. I think that what I like is that it's opened up some of what we know about the mirror universe, but it's left a lot of stuff in the dark. And I'm guessing that we'll get like an info dump from Empress Giorgio next week. That's my prediction.
Sure. Yeah. Cicero.
She's exposition Giorgio.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm along for the ride. I'm enjoying it. I think the more we learn, I won't say the less enthralled I've become, but I will say that I'm less than enthused, I guess, is the way to say that the things that we hypothesized weeks and weeks ago are things that are kind of coming to fruition. The thing that concerns me the most, and I'm still overall, I'm very, very positive on this show. But the thing that concerns me the most is we've got 4 hours of this season left.
Huh.
There are 4 episodes left, and that's it. And it hit me Monday after kind of sitting back, and I was talking to a coworker actually on Tuesday, talking to a coworker, and he was like, yeah, we don't have a lot. There's not a lot left. And I realized that, we've got 4 episodes left, and that's it. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that they are going to have to wrap up, or wherever they determine to leave the series off, that it has to be left off on a cliffhanger to go into the next season. So,
yeah.
How are they going to resolve this mirror universe stuff? We probably will get a lot of exposition from Emperor Jojo. And then how are they going to set up the next crisis to push us in and keep us on the hook for season 2?
Very true. Very true. Rachel?
I want them to go home.
I want to go home.
The mirror universe is scary.
Yeah.
I liked everything that happened in this episode, and I'm sure that I will like what is to come. Mm-hmm. My general feeling is that I'm done with the mirror universe, and I would like them to be kind of going.
Get back to trekking.
Yeah, well, or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my impressions of the episode are positive generally. I thought it was pretty good. But lots and lots of questions, of course. I mean, I say that every week. I know you guys are probably tired of hearing me say that, but at least the questions are engaging and they're interesting, and I care enough about these characters to want to see them answered. So that's probably one of the biggest compliments I could pay to that show, is that I still care after all of these episodes. I still care, and I still want to see more. So that is, I guess that's my final thought before we go to next week. So we actually don't have any listener feedback this week, so that's actually going to do it for this episode of Discovery Debrief. We hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please like and follow us on our social media channels. And if you'd be so kind, we'd also appreciate it if you wrote a review for the show on iTunes or Facebook. It only takes a minute, and we'll be happy to read your review on the air when it's posted. If you have any questions, you can follow the show on Twitter at DSC Debrief, where you can also find all of our individual Twitter handles. And feel free to send us questions through Twitter, our Facebook like page, or by emailing us at hailingfrequencies@discoverydebrief.com. Please be sure to set your courses for this feed for future episodes, and keep an eye on our various channels to find out when we return to duty for next week's episode. As always, though, Until then, long live the Empire.
Long live the Empire.
Go boldly, my friends.